It was just a family photo in front of their ranch. When experts zoom in, they are speechless. Dr. Maya Richardson had dedicated 15 years to documenting black homesteaders in the American West, a chapter of history often erased from textbooks. Her office at the Oklahoma Historical Museum was lined with photographs, land deeds, and testimonies that painted a fuller picture of frontier life, one that included the thousands of black families who had carved out freedom on the plains. The cardboard box arrived on a humid Tuesday morning in June, shipped from an estate sale in Tulsa. Inside, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper, were dozens of photographs from the late 1800s. Maya handled each one carefully, her trained eyes cataloging details, clothing styles, photographic techniques, background elements that could help establish dates and locations. Halfway through the collection, she stopped. The photograph showed a black family of 5 standing in front of a substantial wooden ranch house. The image quality was remarkable for its era. Sharp, well-composed, clearly taken by a skilled photographer. The father stood tall on the left, one hand resting on a wooden post. The mother, wearing a carefully pressed dress, held an infant. 2 other children, a boy and a girl, flanked their parents. Their expressions were serious, formal, as was customary for photographs of that time. But it was the ranch house itself that caught Maya's attention. The structure was impressive, 2 stories, with a wide covered porch and solid construction that spoke of prosperity and permanence. In 1890, for a black family to own such property was extraordinary. This was just 25 years after abolition, during a period when black landowners faced constant threats, violence, and legal maneuvers designed to strip them of their property. Maya turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded pencil, someone had written, "The Williams family, our land, our freedom, 1890. She studied the image again, noting details that told stories of their own. The family's clothing was simple but well maintained. The children stood close to their parents, suggesting tight family bonds. The father's posture conveyed dignity and defiance. A man who had fought for everything he possessed. Maya reached for her magnifying glass, beginning her usual preliminary examination. She scanned across the faces first, then moved to the background, studying the ranch house's construction, the landscape visible behind it, the tools and objects partially visible on the porch. Then she saw something that made her breath catch. There, carved into the wooden post beside the father's hand, was a symbol. It was small, barely visible in the original print, but unmistakable under magnification. A series of geometric patterns that looked distinctly deliberate, distinctly intentional, and distinctly African. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the magnifying glass, moving it slowly across the photograph's surface. The symbol on the post wasn't an accident, wasn't a random mark left by carpenter's tools. It was purposeful, carved with intention and skill. She recognized the basic structure, a heart shape with perpendicular lines crossing through it. Her mind raced through years of research, cultural studies, conversations with scholars of African diaspora. Then it clicked. Sankofa, an Adinkra symbol from the Akan people of Ghana, representing the importance of learning from the past. Maya's pulse quickened. If this symbol was here, there might be others. She moved to her desk and carefully placed the photograph under her digital scanner, one of the museum's recent acquisitions, capable of capturing details invisible to the naked eye. As the machine hummed softly, creating a high-resolution file, Maya pulled reference books from her shelves, volumes on West African symbolism, Adinkra meanings, cultural retention among enslaved populations. When the scan completed, she pulled up the image on her large monitor. The clarity was stunning. She could now see individual wood grains, threads in the family's clothing, and most importantly, details in the ranch house's construction that the original photograph had hidden. Maya zoomed in on the porch posts. There, on each vertical support, were more symbols. Some were barely visible, worn by weather or deliberately subtle in their execution. But they were there. Gai Nyame, representing the supremacy of the divine. Dwenemen, the ram's horn symbolizing strength and humility. Funtunfunafu Denkyem Funafu, the Siamese crocodiles, representing democracy and unity. This can't be coincidental, Maya whispered to herself. She expanded her examination to other parts of the structure. The horizontal beams showed geometric patterns, interlocking diamonds and crosses that resembled Congo cosmograms. The fence posts, visible at the edge of the frame, bore carved lines that could be decorative or could be something more. Maya grabbed her phone and called Dr. James Okoye, a colleague at Howard University who specialized in African cultural retention in the Americas. He answered on the third ring. "James, I need your expertise immediately. I'm looking at a photograph from 1890, black homesteaders in Oklahoma Territory. The ranch house is covered in what I believe are Adinkra symbols and possibly Congo patterns." There was a pause. "Covered in them?" "Mayas, that would be exceptionally rare, and exceptionally dangerous for that time period." "I know. Can you come to Oklahoma? Send me the scans. If what you're seeing is real, this could change everything we understand about cultural preservation in the post-abolition period." Maya sent the files immediately. While she waited for James's response, she continued examining the photograph, finding more symbols, more patterns, more evidence that this family had done something extraordinary. They had built their freedom on African foundations. Dr. James Okoye arrived at the Oklahoma Historical Museum 3 days later. his laptop bag heavy with reference materials, and his eyes bright with anticipation. Maya met him in the lobby, and they barely exchanged pleasantries before heading straight to her office. "Show me everything," James said, settling into a chair in front of Maya's computer. Maya pulled up the high-resolution scans, zooming in on each symbol she had identified. James leaned forward, his expression intensifying with each image. He occasionally made notes, cross-referenced symbols in his books, and muttered in Igbo under his breath. "This is extraordinary," he finally said. "These aren't just random African symbols thrown together. They're deliberate, meaningful, and they tell a story." He pointed to the Sankofa symbol on the main post. "This one is positioned prominently, where the father's hand rests. It's a statement. Look back to move forward. Remember where you came from. For a formerly enslaved family to carve this into their home in 1890, it was an act of resistance," Maya finished. "More than that, it was an act of preservation. Look at the placement of the Gaia Nyame symbols on the posts that support the roof. Except God, I fear none. They're literally building their house on their faith and their heritage." James zoomed in on the fence posts. "These patterns here, these are definitely Congo cosmograms. The 4 moments of the sun: birth, maturity, death, rebirth, the circular nature of life. This family knew exactly what they were doing." Maya pulled out the original photograph, showing James the inscription on the back. "Our land, our freedom. They weren't just talking about legal ownership." "No," James agreed. "They were talking about spiritual and cultural freedom. The freedom to be African in America, to maintain their identity despite everything that had been done to erase it." He sat back, processing the implications. "Do we know anything about this Williams family? Where they came from, who they were?" Maya shook her head. "Just what's on the photograph. I've started searching property records, but black homesteader documentation from that era is notoriously incomplete. Many families didn't trust official records, or officials deliberately excluded them." James studied the father's face in the photograph. "He's young, maybe late 20s, early 30s. If this photo is from 1890, he would have been born around 1860, just before or during the Civil War, probably born into slavery, which means his parents were definitely enslaved," Maya added. "And if they preserved this level of cultural knowledge, passed it down to him so completely that he could carve these symbols correctly, they maintained it through slavery itself," James finished. "Through the Middle Passage, through generations of forced labor and cultural suppression, somehow this knowledge survived." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of that realization settling over them. "We need to find out who they were," Maya said finally. "We need to tell their story." The Oklahoma Land Records Office occupied a converted bank building in downtown Oklahoma City, its vault now housing historical documents instead of gold. Maya and James arrived when the doors opened, armed with what little information they had. The Williams family, Oklahoma Territory, 1890. The clerk, a middle-aged woman named Carol Jenkins, who had worked there for 20 years, listened to their request with growing interest. Black homesteaders in Oklahoma Territory, 1890s. That's actually a fascinating period, Carol said, leading them into the archives. "Most people don't realize that Oklahoma had one of the largest populations of black landowners in the country after the Civil War. Freedmen from Indian Territory, homesteaders from the South, whole towns founded by black settlers." She pulled out oversized ledger books, their leather covers worn smooth by decades of handling. "Property transfers and original claims are recorded here. If the Williams family filed a legal claim, we should have documentation." The search proved challenging. Many black families had their land stolen through violence or legal manipulation, their records lost or deliberately destroyed. Others had never formally registered their claims, knowing that official documentation could make them targets. After 2 hours of searching, James found an entry that made him stop. "Maya, look at this." The record, dated March 1889, showed a land patent issued to Samuel Williams, freedman, for 160 acres in what was then unassigned lands, before the formal organization of Oklahoma Territory. The location was listed as Township 12 North, Range 4 West, land that would become part of Logan County. 160 acres, Maya breathed. A full homestead claim. Carol pulled additional records. "Here's the filing documentation. Samuel Williams registered his claim during the land run of 1889, but there's a notation here. Prior improvement claimed. That means he was arguing he'd already been living on and improving the land before the official opening." "Was that common?" James asked. "For white settlers, yes. They'd claim they'd made improvements and should get priority. For black settlers, it was much riskier. Claiming prior occupation could mean admitting to squatting, which could get your claim denied. But some did it anyway because the alternative was being pushed onto inferior land or no land at all." Maya studied the documents carefully. "Is there any indication of where Samuel Williams came from before the homestead claim?" Carol flipped through supplementary files. "Sometimes there are affidavits or witness statements that include biographical information. Let me check the full file." She returned minutes later with a folder containing additional papers. Inside was an affidavit, handwritten in flowing script, dated April 1889. It was Samuel Williams's sworn statement supporting his homestead claim. Maya read aloud, "I, Samuel Williams, age 29, formerly of Mississippi, do hereby swear that I have occupied and improved the described property since November 1888, constructing dwelling and outbuildings, clearing land, and establishing crops. I claim this land as my right as a freedman, seeking to establish my family's future. Mississippi, James said. That's significant. Mississippi had one of the most brutal systems of sharecropping and debt peonage after the war. Getting out of Mississippi was incredibly difficult. And expensive, Carol added. The journey from Mississippi to Oklahoma Territory would have required resources, planning, and courage. Maya photographed each document carefully. We need to find out more about his life in Mississippi. If he preserved African cultural knowledge this deeply, his parents or grandparents must have held on to it through slavery. The Mississippi Department of Archives and History in Jackson housed one of the most comprehensive collections of slavery-era and Reconstruction records in the South. Maya and James submitted a research request focusing on the years 1860, 1888, and any records related to enslaved or formerly enslaved individuals named Samuel Williams or variations thereof. The response came 2 weeks later. They had found something. The documents arrived digitally, scanned images of plantation records, Freedmen's Bureau files, and county tax records. Maya spread the files across her office monitors, creating a timeline of Samuel Williams' life before Oklahoma. He appeared first in 1865, Freedmen's Bureau records from Adams County, Mississippi. The entry was brief. Samuel Williams, age approximately 5, registered with mother Abigail Williams, age approximately 30. Father deceased, previously enslaved on Thornton Plantation. He was 5 years old at emancipation, Maya said quietly, which means he spent his entire early childhood in slavery. James pulled up additional records. Here, the Thornton Plantation records. The owner, Marcus Thornton, maintained detailed documentation of enslaved people. There's an entry for an Abigail, age 25, and her son Samuel, age 4, dated 1864. But it was another entry that stopped them cold. In the plantation records from 1862, there was a note about Abigail's husband, a man named Joseph, who had been sold away to a plantation in Louisiana, but not before the overseer noted something unusual in the disciplinary log. Slave Joseph discovered conducting unauthorized religious gathering using heathen symbols and African words, James read. But punished and sold to prevent further contamination of other slaves? Maya felt her throat tighten. He was maintaining African practices, and they tore his family apart because of it. But look at this, James said, pulling up another document. There's a note in the 1865 Freedmen's Bureau records. When Abigail registered, she gave testimony about her husband. She stated he had taught her and their son the old ways, the true ways, the ways of their ancestors. She claimed it was their duty to remember, to preserve, to pass down. The picture was becoming clearer. Samuel Williams hadn't learned these symbols and traditions from books or recent teachers. He had learned them from his father, who had learned them from someone before, an unbroken chain of knowledge passed down through generations of slavery. We need to trace this further back, Maya said. If Joseph knew these traditions well enough to teach them, to conduct ceremonies, where did he learn them? James pulled up a database of slave ship records and forced migration patterns. Joseph would have been born around 1830, probably in Mississippi or somewhere nearby. His parents might have been brought directly from Africa, or possibly just one generation removed. They searched through manifests, auction records, and estate inventories. The documentation was fragmentary, often recording enslaved people only as numbers or single names, stripping away identity and history. Then, Maya found it. An 1833 estate sale record from Natchez, Mississippi. Among the property being sold was one Negro man called Joseph, age approximately 3, with mother called Zara, origin noted as Gold Coast. Gold Coast, James said, his voice filled with emotion. That's modern-day Ghana, the homeland of Akan people, the origin of Adinkra symbols. Maya stared at the document, her eyes burning. Zara brought her knowledge with her across the Middle Passage. She taught her son Joseph. Joseph taught his wife Abigail and their son Samuel, and Samuel carved it into his ranch house in Oklahoma Territory, where it stayed hidden for 130 years. The weight of that continuity, that refusal to be erased, settled over them like a blessing. Dr. Patricia Nkrumah, an agricultural historian specializing in African farming techniques in the Americas, arrived in Oklahoma after Maya sent her photographs of the ranch property. Patricia had spent years documenting how enslaved Africans had brought sophisticated agricultural knowledge to the Americas, knowledge that plantation owners appropriated and claimed as their own. Maya and James met her at the museum, eager to show her not just the photographs, but also the land survey maps they had uncovered, showing the Williams property's boundaries and features. Patricia examined the 1890 photograph with intense focus, but her attention wasn't on the symbols carved into the wood. She was studying the land visible in the background, the layout of the fields, the patterns of the crops, the construction of what appeared to be irrigation channels. This is remarkable, Patricia said, pointing to barely visible furrows in the distant fields. Look at the spacing here and the pattern of these channels. This isn't typical American farming technique of that era. She pulled out her laptop and opened images of traditional West African farming systems. This pattern here, alternating rows with different spacing, this is consistent with intercropping techniques used throughout West Africa. The Akan people, specifically, developed sophisticated systems for growing multiple crops in complementary patterns. James leaned closer. Samuel Williams was using African agricultural methods. Not just using them, adapting them brilliantly to Oklahoma soil and climate, Patricia explained. Look at these irrigation channels. In Oklahoma Territory in 1890, most white farmers were still relying on rainfall alone, leading to frequent crop failures. But these channels suggest a system for directing and conserving water during dry periods. She zoomed in on another section. And here, see these taller plants interspersed with shorter ones? That's a traditional African method of using certain plants to provide shade and moisture retention for others. The taller plants also fix nitrogen in the soil, improving fertility without purchased fertilizers. Maya felt excitement building. So Samuel wasn't just preserving cultural symbols, he was using African knowledge to make his land more productive than his neighbors. Exactly, Patricia confirmed. And if he was this successful, it would have made him a target. White farmers failing on adjacent land while a black farmer thrived using methods they didn't understand, that would have created enormous resentment and danger. Carol from the Land Records Office had told them something that now made more sense. She had mentioned that the Williams property had been subject to multiple legal challenges between 1890 and 1895. White neighbors claiming the boundaries were wrong, that Samuel's claim was invalid, that he must have used illegal methods to achieve such productivity. They couldn't understand how he was succeeding, James said, so they assumed he must be cheating somehow. Patricia nodded grimly. It's a pattern repeated throughout the South and West. Black farmers with superior knowledge and techniques faced constant accusations of theft, fraud, or even witchcraft. Their success threatened the narrative that white farmers were inherently superior. She returned to the photograph, studying the ranch house again. The fact that he built this structure, this permanent home, with these symbols carved into it, that suggests he believed he could defend his land, that he had the resources and community support to withstand challenges. Did he? Maya asked. Did he manage to keep the land? Patricia's expression grew somber. That's what we need to find out, because in Oklahoma Territory in the 1890s, black landowners were facing increasing violence and legal theft. The question isn't whether Samuel Williams faced threats, it's whether he survived them. Maya's search expanded to newspapers from the 1890s, particularly black-owned papers that served Oklahoma Territory's African-American communities. These papers, often overlooked by mainstream historians, documented the lives, struggles, and achievements of black settlers in ways that white-owned papers ignored or distorted. In the archives of the Langston City Herald, a newspaper serving one of Oklahoma's all-black towns, Maya found a mention of Samuel Williams in an 1891 edition. The article, titled "Successful Farmers of the Territory," featured brief profiles of black landowners who had established thriving homesteads. The entry for Samuel Williams read, Mr. Samuel Williams of Logan County has developed one of the most productive farms in the territory through innovative agricultural methods. His 160 acres yield crops superior to those of neighboring farms twice the size. Mr. Williams attributes his success to the wisdom of his ancestors and maintains that traditional knowledge, properly applied, can overcome even difficult soil conditions. He and his family are respected members of the community, and his counsel on farming matters is frequently sought by other settlers. The wisdom of his ancestors, James repeated. He was open about it. He wasn't hiding his use of African knowledge. Maya found more references. In 1892, Samuel Williams was mentioned as donating crops to help a neighboring family whose farm had failed. In 1893, he was listed as one of the founders of a mutual aid society that helped black homesteaders defend their land claims against fraudulent legal challenges. But it was a small notice from 1894 that sent chills down Maya's spine. Threats against colored farmers, read the headline. The article reported that several black landowners in Logan County had received anonymous letters warning them to abandon their claims or face consequences. Samuel Williams was mentioned by name as one of the primary targets. White settlers have taken umbrage at the success of Negro farmers in the region, the article stated. Complaints have been filed with territorial authorities, claiming that certain colored homesteaders are using unnatural methods and suspicious practices to achieve superior yields. These baseless accusations appear designed to justify violence and land theft. James found a follow-up article from 2 months later. Williams' Family Stands Firm reported that despite threats and a suspicious fire that destroyed one of Samuel's outbuildings, the family remained on their land. Samuel was quoted as saying, "This land is ours by law and by right. We will not be moved by threats from those who cannot accept our success." Patricia, who had stayed in Oklahoma to continue her research, brought another piece of the puzzle. She had located records from a regional farmers cooperative that operated from 1892 to 1895. Samuel Williams was teaching other farmers his methods, she explained, showing them membership records. He was part of a group of black farmers who shared knowledge and techniques. Look at this. They called themselves the Heritage Farmers Association. They were explicitly preserving and promoting African agricultural practices. The membership list included 15 names, all black farmers with land claims in Logan County and surrounding areas. Next to each name were notes about their specialties: water management, soil conservation, crop rotation, seed saving. They weren't just individual farmers, Maya realized. They were a community, working together to preserve and apply African knowledge. That's why Samuel felt safe enough to carve those symbols into his house. He wasn't alone. But it also made them a bigger target, James added quietly. A group of black farmers outperforming white farmers, explicitly crediting African traditions. In 1890s, Oklahoma, the question hung in the air: what happened to them? The answer came from an unexpected source, a collection of letters donated to the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. A researcher there, responding to Maya's nationwide inquiry about the Williams family, had found correspondence between two black newspapers discussing violence in Oklahoma Territory during the mid-1890s. The letters, exchanged between editors in 1895, discussed what they termed the Logan County situation, a coordinated campaign of intimidation and violence against black landowners who were deemed too successful or too proud. One letter, dated August 1895, described events in chilling detail. The heritage farmers, as they call themselves, have become targets of organized hatred. White settlers, frustrated by their own failures and unwilling to learn from their Negro neighbors, have formed vigilante groups. They claim these farmers use devil worship and African witchcraft to make their crops grow, a transparent excuse for jealousy and greed. Several families have been driven from their land. Others have seen their homes burned, their animals killed, their wells poisoned. Maya's hands shook as she read the next paragraph. Samuel Williams, perhaps the most prominent of the group, has refused to leave despite escalating threats. His family remains on their land, even after night riders burned his barn and destroyed an entire season's harvest. Williams states publicly that he will not be driven from land he claimed legally and improved through honest labor. He says the symbols he carved into his home are prayers for protection and reminders of his ancestors' strength. He believes they will keep his family safe. James looked up from his own reading. Did they? Did the symbols keep them safe? Maya found the answer in the next letter, dated October 1895. The Williams family has vanished. Some say they fled in the night, finally broken by relentless persecution. Others whisper darker possibilities. Their ranch house stands empty, doors open, possessions left behind, as if the family simply evaporated. No bodies have been found, but neither has any trace of the family. The local sheriff, who is sympathetic to the white settlers, claims the Williams family abandoned their claim and has already begun proceedings to declare the land forfeit. Patricia, reading over Maya's shoulder, said quietly, "That was the pattern. Drive families away through violence, then use their absence as proof they'd abandoned their legal claims. The land would be redistributed to white settlers, and all record of the black family's ownership would be erased." "But the photograph," James said. "The photograph survived. Samuel made sure of that." Maya pulled up the image on her screen again, looking at Samuel Williams' face with new understanding. When he had posed for this photograph in 1890, he had already known the dangers. He had carved those symbols into his house, knowing they might be used against him. He had documented his family and his heritage, knowing that someone, someday, might need proof that they existed, that they thrived, that they refused to be erased. "We need to find out what really happened to them," Maya said. "Whether they escaped or whether something worse occurred. And we need to find out what happened to the other families in the Heritage Farmers Association." Patricia had already begun that research. Of the 15 families listed in the cooperative's records, I found documentation showing that by 1897, 13 had abandoned their claims. All of that land ended up in white ownership within 2 years. "And the other 2 families?" James asked. "One made it to Kansas, where they reestablished themselves under a different name. The other?" Patricia hesitated. "There's a newspaper report from a black paper in Tulsa about an unnamed family found murdered on their homestead in 1896. The description matches one of the Heritage Farmers' families." The room fell silent. These weren't just historical records. They were evidence of systematic violence, theft and erasure, crimes that had been buried and forgotten. "But not completely forgotten," Maya said, looking at the photograph. "Samuel Williams made sure we would remember." The breakthrough came from an unexpected email. A woman named Lisa Thompson had seen Maya's public request for information about the Williams family posted on genealogy websites and historical society forums. "I believe Samuel Williams was my great-great-grandfather," Lisa wrote. "My grandmother always told stories about our family having land in Oklahoma that was stolen, about ancestors who had to flee in the night, about symbols and traditions that were kept secret. I never knew if the stories were true. Then I saw your photograph, and I recognized the name." Maya called her immediately. Lisa lived in Chicago, where her family had settled in the early 1900s. She was a social worker in her 50s, and she had spent years trying to piece together her family's history from fragments of stories and incomplete records. "My great-grandfather was Samuel Williams' youngest son, born on that Oklahoma ranch in 1892, Lisa explained. "His name was Daniel. He was only 3 years old when the family left Oklahoma. He carried memories of that house, of his father carving symbols into the wood, of his mother teaching him about their ancestors, but he also carried trauma Nightmares about fires, about men on horses, about running in the dark. She arranged to fly to Oklahoma the following week, bringing documents her family had preserved: a worn Bible with birth dates recorded inside, a small wooden carving that her great-grandfather had made as an adult, trying to recreate symbols he remembered from childhood, and photographs from later years showing the family in Chicago. When Lisa arrived at the museum and saw the 1890 photograph for the first time in person, she wept. "That's them," she said, touching the glass protecting the image. "That's really them. My grandmother showed me a copy once, but it was so faded I could barely see their faces. This is clear. I can see my great-great-grandfather's eyes." Maya gave her time, then gently asked, "What did your family say about what happened? Why they left Oklahoma?" Lisa took a deep breath. "The story passed down was that white settlers wanted their land. They tried everything: legal challenges, threats, violence. My great-great-grandfather Samuel refused to leave. He believed the law would protect them, that their success would speak for itself. But in October 1895, a group of men came in the night. They set fire to the fields. Samuel realized they weren't going to stop, that eventually his family would be killed. So they ran," James said softly. "They ran. They took Daniel and his older sister Ruth and left everything behind: the house, the land, most of their possessions. They traveled at night, avoiding roads, making their way east. They eventually reached St. Louis, then Chicago. Samuel found work in the stockyards. He died in 1911, just 41 years old, from injuries sustained at work. But before he died, he taught his son Daniel everything: the symbols, the meanings, the agricultural techniques, the stories of their ancestors from Africa to Mississippi to Oklahoma." Lisa opened a small wooden box she had brought. Inside was the carving her great-grandfather had made, a piece of wood about 6 inches long, covered in adinkra symbols. Daniel made this in 1950, when he was an old man. He said he was trying to remember exactly what his father had carved into their house in Oklahoma. He wasn't sure he got all the symbols right, but he knew the meanings. Sankofa, return and get it. Guy and Yami, accept God. Dwenemin, humility and strength. Patricia examined the carving carefully, comparing it to the symbols visible in the 1890 photograph. He remembered remarkably well. "These are accurate, and the meanings he preserved are correct. Your family maintained this knowledge through another generation." "We maintained it through every generation," Lisa said firmly. "My grandmother taught me, and I've taught my children. We may not have the land Samuel claimed, but we have what he really fought to preserve: our identity, our heritage, our connection to Africa. That's what those symbols mean. That's what he carved into that house." He was saying, "We are still here. They couldn't erase us." Maya felt tears on her own cheeks. He was right. You're here, and now the world will know his story. 6 months later, the exhibition opened at the Oklahoma Historical Museum. Heritage carved in wood, the Williams family, and African cultural resistance on the American frontier occupied the museum's main gallery, and the opening drew crowds that stretched out the door. The centerpiece was the restored 1890 photograph, displayed in high resolution on a large screen that allowed visitors to zoom in and see every detail, every symbol, every carved pattern, every element of African heritage that Samuel Williams had embedded in his home. Beside it were the documents Maya and James had uncovered, telling the story of 3 generations, from Zara, who brought knowledge from the Gold Coast through the Middle Passage, to her son Joseph, who maintained traditions through slavery, to his son Samuel, who carved that heritage into a ranch house in Oklahoma Territory. Lisa stood with her family, her adult children, and her grandchildren, looking at the images of their ancestors. The museum had worked with Patricia to create an interactive display showing how Samuel's African agricultural techniques had given him superior yields, and how that success had threatened white settlers who couldn't accept black excellence. The land records show that the Williams property was declared abandoned in 1896, Maya explained to a group of visitors during the opening. It was immediately claimed by a white settler who never achieved even a fraction of the productivity Samuel Williams had demonstrated. By 1900, that land had changed hands 3 more times, each owner failing to make it profitable. Because they didn't have the knowledge, James added. They had stolen the land, but they couldn't steal the wisdom that made it valuable. That knowledge left with the Williams family, and it stayed in their family through generations. One of Lisa's daughters, a graduate student in African American Studies, gave a presentation about cultural continuity. My family's story shows that African cultural knowledge wasn't just passively preserved, it was actively used, adapted, and applied to new circumstances. Samuel Williams wasn't trying to recreate Africa in Oklahoma. He was demonstrating that African wisdom had practical value in building a new life. Artists. The exhibition included a section on the broader community of black farmers who had used similar techniques, including profiles of the 15 families in the Heritage Farmers Association. Researchers had located descendants of 7 of those families, and their stories were included in the display. The pattern was consistent: successful black farmers using African agricultural methods, facing violence and legal theft, being driven from their land, but preserving their cultural knowledge despite everything. Near the end of the exhibition was a reconstruction, created by master carpenters working with Patricia's guidance and Lisa's family traditions. It showed a portion of the Williams Ranch house porch, complete with accurately carved Adinkra symbols and Congo patterns. Visitors could touch the symbols, feel the carved wood under their hands, and understand that this wasn't abstract art. It was a family's identity made physical, made permanent, made into a shield against erasure. The final display showed photographs spanning 5 generations. Samuel Williams in 1890, his son Daniel in 1950, Lisa's mother in the 1970s, Lisa and her children in the 2000s, and Lisa's grandchildren today. In each photograph, someone held the small wooden carving Daniel had made, the one covered in adinkra symbols, a through line of heritage passed from hand to hand, generation to generation. They couldn't erase us, Lisa said during her speech at the opening. They took the land. They tried to take our history. They wanted us forgotten. But my great-great-grandfather Samuel Williams carved our heritage into wood that lasted 130 years. He made sure we would be remembered. He made sure we would know where we came from. And he made sure that when the technology finally existed to see what he'd hidden in plain sight, the world would know. We were here. We built something extraordinary. We survived. The crowd erupted in applause. Maya watched as Lisa's grandchildren, children who now knew exactly where they came from, who understood the strength in their lineage, stood taller, smiled brighter, carried themselves with the pride their ancestor had shown in that 1890 photograph. Samuel Williams had lost his land, but he had won the larger battle. His family remembered, history recorded, heritage survived. In the photograph, enlarged to life-size on the gallery wall, Samuel's hand still rested on that carved post, touching the Sankofa symbol. Return and get it. Look to the past to move forward. And finally, 130 years later, his descendants had returned and gotten what he'd left them, the truth of who they were, where they came from, and what they had overcome. The symbols carved into wood had become a bridge across time, connecting Africa to America, past to present, oppression to resistance, theft to reclamation. Samuel Williams had built more than a ranch house. He had built a legacy that no amount of violence could destroy. And now, at last, that legacy was visible for all to see.